Venerable Mahinda, respected members of the Mahasangha, distinguished guests, speakers, brothers and sisters in the Dharma. Before we start with today's program for the speakers, I just wanted to take a moment to reflect on how special and unique yesterday was. So if everyone can just take a moment to think about the time they spent at Uluru at sunrise, celebrating Bante's birthday together, the afternoon session where we all did creative and touching presentations on metta and pure love, and finally finishing the day with the very sacred and special Welcome to Country with Alison and the Mutujulu women. I'm sure that yesterday's experiences have connected each and every one of us even more to each other, to the land, and to metta. Now I'd like to invite our first guest speaker, Professor Shane Houston, to the stage. Now, Professor Houston is the most senior Aboriginal academic in Australia, holding the position of Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the University of Sydney. He completed his PhD at Curtin University in 2003, graduating with a Chancellor's Commendation. He has also held a series of adjunct academic appointments, including at Curtin University and the University of Notre Dame, Sydney. Shane is a Gungulu man from central Queensland, a father and a grandfather. He has worked in Aboriginal affairs for more than 40 years, holding many roles at local, state, and national levels. Shane has worked intensely in the community sector over a number of decades, including as CEO of an Aboriginal medical service and national coordinator of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Health Organisation. He has also held senior executive positions in the public sector for more than 17 years. He has served on dozens of national, state and international strategy and operational committees dealing with Aboriginal affairs, policy and programs. In 2009, Shane was awarded the Chief Minister's Public Service Medal for meritorious and outstanding public service for his contributions aimed at improving the cultural security of services in the health sector. Shane took up his position as Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Indigenous Strategy and Services at the University of Sydney in April 2011. In this role, he is tasked with making the university a central national player in bridging the social divide that confronts Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Please welcome Professor Shane Houston to the stage.
Is that on? My goodness. Thank you very much for that introduction, Venerable Mahinda. Uncle, Aunt, it's so good to see you again. Family and friends, thank you very much for the invitation to join you here today. As an academic, I spend most of my day in an office looking at numbers or looking at courses or working out how we might do a better job in a very large institution. Just last week, we enrolled another 16,500 students, bringing a total number to over 57,000 students at the university. So most of my day is taken up with numbers, with research, with the empirical side of life, things that you can count. And when the opportunity came to join you here today, it was a wonderful thing because it gave me the chance to talk about spirit. And in an academic world, spirit is something that isn't tangible. You can't empirically prove it, they say. So the opportunity to come here today was just a remarkable gift. And it was a gift not only because I get to talk to spirit, but I also get to connect to people that I have worked with in the Territory and to country in the Territory where I spent more than 10 years. It is part of our tradition to acknowledge traditional owners of country, Anangu people in this part of the country have looked after their land and their responsibilities for tens of thousands of years. And it's been encouraging to watch across Australia many organisations start to pick up the responsibility to acknowledge or welcome visitors to country. But that's had a bit of a downside as well, because in some ways people think that an acknowledgement or a welcome is just part of the political process. It's a politically correct thing to do. It's part of the order of proceedings. Just like you might tell people where the toilets are and where the food is and where the water is, you also acknowledge country. But it's not that. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people for tens of thousands of years have had ceremony that is associated with seeking permission to enter and to extend the welcome to enter for people as they move from one country to another. So if Pindara people wanted to move to communities to the west with Ngarangara people, there would be ceremony attached. It wasn't just in the real world, in the physical world, that these permissions were also sought. It's also in our relationship with the spiritual world. When people in my community approach very special sites that are associated with our creation and our people, we throw rocks at the sandstone outcrops to let people know, to let spirits know that we are coming and to seek their permission to join with them on that very special place. So acknowledgements of country should not be seen as just part of the order of proceedings. It is an invitation to you all to accept the responsibilities that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people hold to care for country and to care for each other, whether they are people who live with us or people that are visiting us. A welcome to country and an acknowledgement of country is an acceptance of that responsibility. I remember many years ago, I was part of a committee that helped organise the visit of Pope John Paul II, and he had a big event here in Alice Springs, and there was some difference of opinion in the committee about who should greet the Pope. And when we asked senior Aranda people about what the answer should be, they looked at us rather quizzically and said, you know, if you're born on Yiperinya land, you're a Yiperinya child. Now that doesn't mean every child that was born in Alice Springs became Aboriginal. It meant that they had responsibilities to land, to country, to care for it, to nourish it, and to respect it. So on that decision, we had all children greet the Pope. So acknowledgements of country and the welcome that you would have received at Mutijulu, at Uluru, is an extension of that. It is an invitation. And I hope that while you're here, and when you leave here, you carry with you that responsibility to care for country and to care for people that visit. As William said, I'm a Gungaloo man from central Queensland. Those who know Rockhampton, you go inland about 30 mile up the range to a little mining town, and the Dawson and Callide valleys stretch to the west and the southwest from Mount Morgan. We're a big family. If you go there and ask to meet the Houstons, people will look at you very quizzically and who are they? Because Houstons is not my family name. Houston is my dad's boxing name. And like many Aboriginal people in central Queensland, he boxed in the tents, and these were, you know, the tents that travelled the countryside, and these boxes in the tents would then be challenged by local lads, and if the local lads won, they'd win some money. If they didn't, well, they didn't. And at a very young age, Dad decided during the Second World War that he would join the Air Force. But he had no official papers because in Queensland we were still under the Act, the Aborigines and Torres Strait Islanders Act. We needed permission to go places. When I was born, I was counted in the census, but then I was cast aside as not being equal to non-Aboriginal people and included in the count of cattle. That's the sort of environment that existed in Queensland. But my dad decided that he would join the Air Force underage and stand alongside other Australians to defend the country. And he did so at a time when the head of the Army, the head of the Air Force and the head of the Navy said it was neither desirable nor required that Aboriginal people should join the armed services. But he did. And the only way he could get in was to use his boxing papers. And that's why when he enlisted, he took the name Houston, and that stuck with him in his career in the Air Force and in the Army and after he left the Army. But my father's family are the Tobys, and they're a huge family. My Uncle Gordon and Auntie Heather had 19 children. My Uncle Bill and Auntie Phyllis had 13 children. So you go home and you're walking down the street and someone will go, "Hello, Uncle," and you go, "Who are you?" And then you have to stop for a moment and then find out who they're related to. Right, that means you're, okay, I've got you now. "Nephew, how are you?" You know, and you actually have to do this very regularly. So we're a big family. And my father was responsible for giving me a lot of what I call my treasures. They're coat pegs on which I hang my life's values and journey. And he, during his time in the armed services, was also a boxer. He carried his skill in, and he was Army boxing champion. And I said, "Dad, you've got to teach me how to box." And he said, "No, son, I won't. Because you should not have to fight." He had a saying, he borrowed sayings from everywhere. He said, "Words are a poor man's weapon." So he would rather me read and be able to argue than to fight. So he would give me these coat pegs that I've been able to hang my life's journey on across my life. And I always like to thank him for that. He's no longer with us, but he still is with us in many, many ways. My mother is a non-Aboriginal woman who met my father when he was training to be a paratrooper. Dad was the first Aboriginal paratrooper in the Australian Army. He was training at Williamstown, just north of Newcastle, about 108 mile north of Sydney. And they met and they fell in love, and that was a glorious thing. And then they went home to tell my mother's parents that they'd fallen in love and they wished to marry. And my mother's parents were very happy until my father walked in the door. And at that point they said to my mother, "Paddy, if you walk out that door, don't you ever walk back in again." So she packed up her bags and she left. And she went to live in an Aboriginal community that she'd never been to before. And she had a wonderful 43 years of marriage with my father before he passed away. And I always acknowledge my mother because she too has given me these treasures. And the big treasure that she has given me is the treasure of hope. When you think about it, you can't leave your family, you can't leave everything you know unless you have this enormous well of hope on which you can draw to sustain you during those difficult times. And anyone that knows me knows I'm a cup half full sort of guy. There's always good in things. We can't always allow ourselves to be overtaken by negativity. There are positive things in life and we've got to hang on to them. And I think that's the treasure my mother has given me, this unlimited ability to hope not only that things will be better, but to maintain hope that we as people can do better. So that's who I am. And I've warned William, I'll talk the leg off an iron pot and he's got to throw things at me to get off. So what I wanted to do today is talk to you a bit about nurturing spirit. Now you would have heard yesterday and you would have read that in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander lives, we have a different approach to the notion of who we are and where we are. In some societies around the world, it is the individual that is the basic unit of life, the power and responsibility of the individual. In Aboriginal communities, that is not that way. We have a sense in our communities that we are part of a much broader scheme. that we do have responsibilities, each one of us. Each of us have gifts that we use to help sustain our communities and our families. We might be good at fishing, we might be good at hunting, we might be good at ceremony. We might be good at gathering, we might be good at educating children. We might be good at remembering and painting the important stories that describe and teach others about who we are. We each have our gifts. But these gifts are not isolated or unconnected to the gifts of everyone else in your family and in your community. Different people bring different strengths. They bring their own treasures, and together we are able to do more as a people. But it goes even further than that. The animals in our life are our sisters and brothers. The plants, the environment, the sky, the water, the land are all part of our family. So we have responsibilities to them, and we also have we also have the responsibility to acknowledge that their gifts need to be nurtured and valued as well. So that in Aboriginal communities, it's not the dominance of humanity that is the most important theme. It is the interconnection between humanity, plants, animals, water, land, the sky. It is the totality of life that becomes the paramount feature of our identity. And that can often be a challenge, because some people think that it's a simple equation, Shane. Land is a resource to be exploited, and you should exploit the resource and that will make you richer. That's what some people think. And they were surprised, and continue to be surprised in many cases, when Aboriginal communities around the countryside say, no, we're not against development, but you cannot do that because that will destroy important features of our relationship to each other and our relationships to the land, the sky, the water, the plants and the animals. And that is often a point of some tension. But it is an important feature of who we are. The way forward in some of these circumstances is not to accept that one person has the right or one society has the right to control everything, but to find a society in which difference is valued and which allows us to move forward collectively in a connected way. That is something that is fundamental, I think, to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander life and community. There are examples that I know where I've seen the differences misunderstood. Some people think that Aboriginal people aren't very good at keeping time. They never turn up on time. We've got an hour for this meeting, we've got to get through the agenda, Shane, just do it. And they don't understand that there is some fundamental differences in how we approach the question of time. When I was talking with Venerable Mahindra, I was making the point that Christians around the world will celebrate Christmas on the 25th of December, no matter where they are, right? No matter where they are. But in many parts of Aboriginal life, our traditional business can occur anywhere between October and March. Anywhere between October and March. But it will always happen at that place, because that place is the point of connection between who we are as peoples, as a spirit, as a culture, and our relationship to our land, to the animals, the plant, the sky, and the water. Aboriginal people tend to be more place-oriented. I can remember coming to Uluru for the handover, I can't remember the date, but I can remember the people I was with, the experiences I had, and the feelings that I went away with. That's the sort of approach that you will find common in many Aboriginal communities. Now, I said earlier that I'm an academic and I tend to deal with the empirical on most days. And the idea of coming today and having a chance to talk about spirit was going to be uplifting for me. But I thought I'd go back and have a look for the evidence anyway, just to see what I could find. Not surprisingly, but in a reassuring way, I found a substantial amount of evidence from the early 1990s on that talks to this question of collective agency. The power, we all have power in ourselves to do something. But there is research that now says that when we get together, we can do so much more. And it's not just the sum of each of the individuals in the room. It's actually something greater than that. Some of the work from Stanford University has given evidence to this notion of collective agency. And in it, they come this close to talking about spirit, but they just don't say it because academics never do. Maybe except me. I'm a health economist, by the way, and one of the things that I enjoyed in my career was finding ways to incorporate Aboriginal values, spirit, in resource allocation formulas in the health sector. How can we spend our money better so that it enriches people's spirit as much as anything else? So these academics, they came that close to talking about spirit, but they didn't. But you can read very clearly in their work this notion that we have shared values, we have shared treasures, that when we work together, that when we are together, we produce more than the sum of the number in the room. So that the 200 people in this room might be 200 people, but our power to change things and to deliver greater good might be 10-fold, 20-fold, or 30-fold that. This research was fascinating. They found not only that it worked, it was true in education systems. They found it was true in local neighbourhoods when dealing with violent crime. They found it was true in dealing with the trauma that people suffer. They found that it was true in organisations, in corporations. They found it to be true. So it's now as if the research is catching up to what we have always known, that the spirit can move things that the numbers cannot. And to me that was yet another example of some of the messages that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have been sharing with Australia since I started working a good number of years ago. I was about 6 when I started. But I can remember in 1972, 71 Aboriginal communities were saying to Australia, you can't just deal with health problems by focusing on the disease. You've got to take into account employment, housing, education, cultural matters, the well-being that people hold, the reserve of well-being that rests in people and in communities. You have to take into account education, the availability of municipal services. These things are fundamental if you want to improve people's health. People thought we were a bit, bit airy-fairy and, they didn't think it was that important. 4 years later, the World Health Organization published a paper that's got a bit of fame about it now. It's called the Declaration of Alma Ata. And in it, they say exactly the things that Aboriginal people were telling Australian health systems 4 years earlier. Exactly the thing. In 1989, Aboriginal communities again spoke out about the need for us to think more carefully about how we plan and deliver health services. I use the health examples because they're the ones I'm most familiar with. And they published a report in 1989, a National Aboriginal Health Strategy, that pointed to the need for us to more carefully integrate different components of life, including culture and well-being. And now if you look at the direction of health systems in Australia today, you'll see validation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's thinking way back then in what we propose to do now. So there are a number of points that I'll summarise for you. I'm conscious of time. Oh, okay, good. I can talk forever. Okay, I'll keep going. You'll be sorry. But I'll give you one promise. I'm not going to sing, you know. I sound like two marbles rolling around in a tin, you know. Not real good. I'm a real Patsy Cline fan, and, you know, Sam Cooke and Charlie Pride, you know, Wings of a Dove and Snow, you know, Crystal Chandelier, you know. But I think I knew those before I knew the national anthem, you know. But I'm not going to sing. So, what is it about spirit? How do we find ways of allowing people to admit to themselves that this is important? How do we find ways of getting stodgy academics to admit that this notion of spirit is important to the goals that they set for the education of our young people, and therefore the shape of services and the shape of administration, the shape of government, the shape of our businesses, the shape of our social life? How do we engage people in a process which will allow them to admit to themselves, to be open to the idea that it's okay to talk about spirit? You know, when I moved to the University of Sydney, I thought that was going to be a challenge. I'd spent 10 years here in the Territory working with people who continue to amaze me in their richness of generosity, their kindness of spirit, and their dogged determination to continue. Just thinking about the research, the Stanford research, that also pointed out that richness of spirit, this notion of collective agency, the coming together of people being greater than the sum of its parts, actually helps us not only with things like education systems and violence in our local neighbourhoods, but it helps us ride out the rough spots in life as well. Those peaks and troughs that life is always that always feature in our lives. And as I was thinking about what I might speak about today, I got word of the terrible death of a young girl in the Kimberley, a young 10-year-old girl who had suicided. And people said to me, "This is outrageous, Shane. What should we do? How can we move forward?" And they're saying, "It's going to take generations, Shane." I said, "No, it's not. It does not have to take generations." The notion of collective spirit can deliver, collective agency can deliver incredible results. And I know this to be true because I have watched other communities struggle with suicide. Communities not far from here in the north over the 2003 to about 2012, in the early part of that decade, had a peak in youth suicide in their communities. It was a horrible, horrible thing. It devastated that community. The response by government was to put 32 bureaucrats in a plane and fly them over. And I'm thinking, well, what's that going to change? The community didn't want them. And they said, "Shane, what should we do?" I said, "Well, tell them not to come." "Oh, can we do that?" "Yes." So they did. They said, "Don't bother coming, we're going to sort this out." So groups of people in their community, men and women, elders in their community, sat and talked. Not over a long, long time, but over about 3 weeks. And they identified the things that they would do for each other to make sure that they got control of the number of suicides in their community. You know the sort of things that they did? They said, you know, we know that if people go to school, there's less chance of them, you know, if they do well at school, less chance of suicide. So some of the old people in that community every morning got on the school bus. And when the school bus went around the community, oh no, Joey's still asleep. The old fella, get off the bus and you go into that house. Get up, young boy, you're going to school. And that young boy got up and went to school. They said things like, if someone says, oh, I'm going to kill myself, and they walk off, you don't just sit there and panic. Someone goes with them and talks to them and shares with them and knows they're not alone. Someone else in the group goes to the clinic. Someone else in the group goes to the police. It was what they were going to do for each other that was going to make the difference. And not surprisingly for many, some of the bureaucrats it was a surprise because they thought what you needed were psychologists, psychiatric care, good interventions of that nature. But the notion of using spirit, our collective agency, to help people was what delivered the real results. Suicide went like that. In a very short period of time, rates of suicide in these communities plummeted. Absolutely plummeted. And that was a joy to behold. Not only have they saved many, many young people's lives, but they were also able to improve education. They were able to do so many other things because they had taken the time to do things for others. And that's not a surprise for Aboriginal people because our society is based in many ways on doing things for others. I might catch the fish, or I might catch scrub fowl, or I might catch the turkey, but it's not necessarily mine to own. Others will take it, they'll prepare it, they'll share the benefit of that amongst the families and communities. So sharing and doing for others is part of what Aboriginal culture is about. So that's how it seems, that is how it is. And I know when I was asked the other night, what can we do? I said first that we can go and work with communities. Listen to the examples like the one I've just given you about communities to the north of here. Learn from that and find ways that we can take that local experience. And if you can imagine it in this way, as I do, that you saw this community wrap their arms around all their members. If you can take that local experience and you can generalise it in communities across Australia, you will get a sense that I think we can do much, much more than we have been able to do. We don't have to rely on the empirical world of the academics, of the doctors, of those groups of people who bring great skill and treasure to our endeavours, but they are not the only answer. There is perhaps, and the research is now starting to show, that this notion of collective agency, this notion of people being more than the sum of their parts, offers great to the potential of a society to deal with the challenges that it faces and to lift the joy in the community beyond levels that they might otherwise think possible. So that's the sort of experience that I have seen with joy and with culture and with sharing in our communities. And it's not just the academics that I have to convince or that we have to convince about this. It is about us convincing many, many others. And I know this to be possible as well. I've watched very senior doctors, one here in Alice Springs. Alison might know an old guy not with us now, Dr. Trevor Cutter. And he was a Collins Street trained physician from Melbourne, very, very well thought of physician. He came to work at the Central Australian Aboriginal Congress here in Alice Springs and he was going to be there for 6 months and he spent 26 years. But he was able to adapt the clinical skill that he had been taught in his medical training to embrace more of the culture and spirit of Aboriginal people and find new pathways where clinical care could be delivered that respected Aboriginal people's values and our culture and our identities. And we can point to many other people around the countryside, Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal people alike, who have stepped up and been willing to admit to themselves that the possibility of collective agency, of spirit, that it could help us change not only the circumstance for that family or that neighbourhood or that community, but for the whole country and beyond. That's the sort of potential that rests in an appreciation of collective agency, of spirit, and a boldness of people who are prepared to admit to themselves that it can make and does make a real difference. I should finish because I've talked enough, but there's just, I'm an old man. I'm a grandfather, and I keep saying to my, I've got to tell you this story. In my family, all of my grandmother's sisters are my grandmothers, right? So I have biggest mob of grandmothers. And when my grandmother passed away, my Auntie Elvie stepped in and she became my grandmother. And I was talking to her one day, and we were talking about Aboriginal affairs, because I was, keen to work in that area. And we were talking about the 1967 referendum, when in Australia, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, when the discriminatory provisions in our founding constitution that punished Aboriginal people were removed. And I was talking to her about that, and I said, "Oh, what should we do, Aunt?" I called her Aunt. "What should we do, Aunt?" And she said to me, "Oh, breed up. That's what you've got to do. Breed up." And I looked at her very quizzically, and I said, "Why?" She said, "We need the votes." So this old woman who grew up at Cherbourg Mission in Queensland was as smart as a penny, that one. She knew exactly what to say. So I've seen many things change in my lifetime, and I remain supremely confident that the collective agency, that the spirit of people will change the world. In my own job, I was just talking earlier that when I left the Territory and went to work in Sydney, people said to me, "Are you sure you want to do that? Sydney's a bit of a, Sydney, University of Sydney's a snake pit, mate, And I said, no, off I went. And I went knowing that there would be people who had good minds and good hearts, and that I could find those people and that we could do things. And we started to talk with the university, 57,000 students, 10,000 staff, and I was amazed, not that of the response that I got, but the passion of the response that I got. Because as I worked my way around the university, talking to faculties and professional service units and student bodies and alumni and other people that were involved in the university community, and I'd say to them, "We're going to do some great things in Aboriginal affairs, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander higher education, and we think you should get involved." And their response was, "You mean we've got permission to get involved?" Because it is almost as though they had not been able to admit to themselves that they had a role to play. And some of the constraints that stopped them from thinking anew about their contribution came from within inside the university, it came from inside Aboriginal politics, it came from inside a whole range of different areas. And then when we said to them, "Yes, we want you involved," they didn't believe us. So we had to spend the next 3 or 4 years proving to the university community that we were serious, that we believed that the collective agency, that the spirit and the whole of the university could produce remarkable results in an area that had not thus far been able to do so. Next Thursday and Friday and Saturday, I've got to present to the University Senate, the governing board of the university, our 4-year report. And it's rather surprising, because the first thing that I asked people to do was to list everyone that was involved. I didn't want a list of people who were peripherally involved. Who are the champions that you know of in the university who are out there really doing it? 1,063 people. 1,063 people. And then we looked at the results. And in an environment where the university was struggling to attract Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, the number of Aboriginal students commencing at the university each year has risen by 46%. The number of staff employed at the university has risen by 60%. The proportion, the size of the Aboriginal community as a proportion of the university student body has increased by just over 30%. Our outreach services to young people in communities between January and February last year and January, February this year, we run a Your Tutor, it's called. So young people come and they get connected, because some of the schools that our kids go to aren't the best schools, right? So we've got to do more to help those young people realise their full potential. So we have this tutorial service. That tutorial service grew by over 1,000% in 12 months. The university people, those over 1,000 people, 1,063 people, who had put their hand up and who said, oh, I don't necessarily believe that he wants me involved, but I'm going to give it a go, they have delivered a remarkable result. A remarkable result. And to me, it is yet again confirmation that this notion that together we can deliver something more joyful and something more lasting by doing it as a whole, and recognising that the whole is not just the people, it is about our responsibilities to each other, those that are near, those people who visit us, our responsibilities to our land, to our plants, to our animals, to our water and to our sky. And if we do that well, the future for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and I also think for humankind and the globe more broadly, I think is a truly promising one. Thank you all for the opportunity to talk with you today.